Today on LawNext, my guest is Sean West. He's the co-founder of Hence Technologies, a company that's tackling one of the most pressing challenges that businesses and their legal advisors face today, navigating the increasing global volatility and geopolitical uncertainty. Sean is also the author of the newly published book, Unruly, Fighting Back When Politics, AI, and Law Upend the Rules of Business. A timely exploration of how political uncertainty, technological disruption, and legal shifts are creating profound challenges for businesses of all sizes. Sean's company recently launched Hence Global, an AI-powered platform designed to help organizations monitor and manage geopolitical risks in real time. Before founding Hence, Sean served as Global Deputy CEO of Eurasia Group, a leading global affairs advisory firm, where he advised CEOs, general counsel, and investors on geopolitical and legal risk. In our conversation today, we'll discuss the collision of politics, technology, and law that Sean calls unruliness, how businesses can respond to these challenges, and the evolving role of legal professionals in this increasingly complex landscape. I'm Bob Ambrogi, and this is LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to any of that, please take a moment to hear from the sponsors whose generosity supports this podcast. Reclaim your time with Practice Panther, the all-in-one legal practice management software trusted by tens of thousands of attorneys worldwide. With automated time tracking, secure client portals, and customizable workflows, you'll transform non-billable administrative tasks into streamlined processes. Practice Panther's intuitive platform handles everything from client intake to payment processing, allowing you to focus on what you do best, practicing law. Visit practicepanther.com today to start your free trial and discover why leading firms choose Practice Panther. You didn't go to law school to waste time writing and responding to discovery requests. Never waste time on discovery again with BriefPoint. BriefPoint drafts your discovery responses and requests for documents within minutes of your first sign-in. BriefPoint is the most reliable discovery drafting solution on the market, and it works right out of the box. Get your first document drafted by going to briefpoint.ai and clicking Get Started. No credit card required. BriefPoint. Draft what matters, automate the rest. Now let's get to today's conversation. Sean, welcome to LawNext.
Thanks. I've always wanted to be on this, and I'm so glad you're having me, Bob. It's going to be a fun conversation.
I hope so. Good to see you. I know we've met in the flesh a couple of times at the TLTF summit down in Miami, but good to have a chance to talk a little bit more leisurely than we might be able to do there. There's so much I want to talk about with you today. You have recently, your company, Hence Global, has recently launched an AI-powered platform to kind of help companies navigate geopolitical risk. You've also recently published a book that we'll talk a little bit about. But I was thinking how it's kind of funny that so many founders I talked to recently are, when they start a company, especially in the legal tech space, they start a company that's really focused on some issue they've encountered in their law practice, like the inefficiency of tracking time or the fact that document assembly platforms don't really work for them very well. You're launching a company to kind of focus on, but you haven't launched it. You've launched this a couple of years ago, but you've launching a product, you've put out this book. It's really kind of focusing on the fact that in some ways the world is falling apart, that politics and technology and law are all coming together in a way that is creating this profound sense of unruliness, as you call it. So why don't, before we get to any of that, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to this place to be focusing on these issues?
Yeah, look, I think it's kind of an interesting story for anyone in the legal sector. I spent over a decade in geopolitical risk. I was a U.S. political risk forecaster. I was deputy CEO of the top geopolitical risk firm for a number of years. And then I went to business school and on my business school sabbatical, dove headfirst into digital transformation and how pretty much every business in the world was going to get disrupted. And business school is very different when you know what team you play for. And I was in the advisory world. So suddenly every case study was a study of companies failing. And I could see all of the stories being stories you could write about the traditional advisory world. And I said, well, I really want to go over there and try and build technology for the future of what advice is going to be like. And so I incorporated Hence Technologies actually in 2019 with a co-founder who was leaving Palantir at the same time. And our initial product suite was really focused on how people buy advice. We were really interested in how people choose to buy advice. And legal raised their hand and said, well, we buy lots of advice. Some companies buy $1 billion a year worth of advice. Can you help us figure out if we're getting good value out of the advice we're buying? So we were heads down, like legal tech focused company on outside counsel management, which evolved into broader matter management, litigation management for a handful of years. And as a result of that, I'd go to all the legal tech conferences. And it was a pretty exciting time because it was I started pre the advent of Gen AI. Then Gen AI comes on the scene and everybody, that's all anyone wants to talk about. But I sort of realized I'm going to conference after conference and it's all lawyers talking to lawyers about being lawyers. And nobody seems to realize the world is falling apart around them. And also, everyone's talking about AI as if it's not subject to a political process that will either turbocharge it or make it a vector of combat between the US and China or restrict it. And so I said, hey, I actually know a lot about this political stuff. Let me start writing. I'll start writing about geopolitics for lawyers and see if anyone cares. And I started doing that about a year and a half ago. And there was just huge
That's your
uptake.
Substack. You have a Substack? Is
It's a
that,
Substack,
yep.
geolegal.substack.com.
Yep.
There was just huge uptake. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, whoa, okay, everyone's interested in this. So I started writing that. I pitched a couple book ideas and landed on kind of the bigger idea. I actually initially had an idea about geopolitics for GCs as a book. And my publisher said, well, can you make it a bigger idea? And I said, okay, I've got some bigger ideas. Let's do the bigger idea. But actually in the process of that, Bob, the process of writing the book, which we'll talk about, my engineers looked up and said, well, if everybody's interested in all this stuff, we should build a product that solves that too. And I said, wow, like the world's coming full circle. I was interested 6, 7 years ago in how political advice could be automated. And now I have a legal tech engineering team, a team I've built up that's been working in that space forever. They want to build it. Let's go. So we've built this new product, which we can talk all about that we've just debuted as well.
All right. Well, maybe we should start with the book, only because that kind of provides, I think, the backdrop for the product and maybe helps make more sense of the product. The book is Unruly, Fighting Back When Politics, AI, and Law Upend the Rules of Business. There it is. What's the premise here? What are you talking about in this book?
Yeah. So the core idea behind the book is that everybody understands the world is volatile, right? But they don't necessarily understand why it's volatile or how to deal with it. So unruly is a play on words, right? Unruly and volatile are fairly close synonyms, but actually the world is kind of unruling. The rules and norms that were developed during globalization are falling away, right? And most executives cut their teeth and built their businesses and built their careers during this period of time, really with the heyday from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the fall of Bear Stearns, where the world was just characterized by one massive rush to get rich through harmonizing rules and laws and making it simpler for businesses to be global. Now, I don't have to tell anyone who's been watching politics for the last 3 or 4 months, that is not the mood politically, certainly not in Washington, but over the last few years, it wasn't the mood in London when Brexit occurred. It's not been the mood in a number of European capitals where far right, xenophobic characters have done well or threatened to do well in their elections. We've seen a real push against globalization. So we have to step back and say, okay, well, if the world we've been living in is retreating, what takes its place? And I think a big analytical mistake most subject matter experts make is to just straight line what they know about their domain and say that that explains the world. So me as a political scientist, I could just say, well, we've got this fracturing of the world into fragmented parts. And actually, we're going to have a world of regions, or we're going to have a decentralized world with no hegemon, or we're going to have a Cold War 2.0. The reality is politics is changing. Legal is changing at the same time. The role that law plays in society is changing. The way technology is applied to legal is changing. And so a lawyer might straight line say, well, what does that mean for legal work, for lawsuits, et cetera? At the same time, AI is changing the tech stack of every business. And so I stepped back and I said, well, these three factors are all really the critical factors that businesses depend on to be successful. They depend on stable politics, legal system that they can count on to get a fair shake, and on the ability to harness technology to deliver better services and bring down costs. If all of those are changing at once, that's a world of risk, but it's also a world of opportunity. So the kind of core thesis of the book is that politics, AI, and law are all changing at once, yet most of us are organized only to fight these as individual factors. And the future will be characterized by the risks that emerge from the clash of these factors.
Is it an opportunity for the businesses or opportunities for individuals within the business? And where do lawyers fit into all of this within a business?
Well, I think the role of the lawyer is increasingly important in this type of world. And I think let's take the in-house example. So, yeah, there were probably a lot of government affairs teams and corporate intelligence teams that were advising the CEO about how Vladimir Putin was amassing troops on the border of Ukraine. And, there's a 53% chance he won't go, or whatever it is that we forecasters do when we build these scenarios and we say he may go, he may not go. Then, of course, he crosses the border. And suddenly there's 1,000 legal questions that have to be answered about sanctions. Did you lose the Russian market and the Ukrainian market on the same day? Right? Do you have to sell your assets in a fire sale? If you do, how do you do it? What do you have to do to comply with labor law for all the employees that you have? What can you do with the IP that you develop? Like, all these questions were asked kind of after the fact. So I think a lot of lawyers woke up and a lot of corporates woke up to the fact that what they were dealing with was really this new issue, what I call geolegal risk, that's at the intersection of politics and law. That's this symbiotic relationship between law and politics that generates new risks. And as a result, when companies look out at what's happening in the Middle East, or when they get worried about what might happen with China and Taiwan, they should no longer default to the fact that, like, the political experts will help them navigate that. Actually, there's a lot of geolegal strategic planning you could do today. If you think there's a non-zero chance China might flex its muscles with Taiwan, that doesn't have to be militarily. They could just simply declare Taiwan has to follow mainland Chinese law. Let's just say China declared that one day, right? That's just the rule.
Mhm.
Well, all of a sudden lawyers are going to be in pretty high demand to help you navigate what that means for your business in Taiwan, for your suppliers in Taiwan, et cetera. And as a result, I spent a lot of time in the book talking about how legal should be in the lead on a lot of these issues. And we've seen law departments increasingly take on the reporting lines for government affairs, for risk, for what was ESG, for ethics, right? It's been a trend that we've seen increasing. I actually think it's a really smart one, because you really can't navigate the new world if the legal part of it is an afterthought. And just to I can give a bit more texture, I'm sure you've got some more questions, but, like, think about how you actually get influence in today's Washington. I had a piece in MIT's Business Review a couple weeks ago with Brody Mullins, who's an expert on lobbying, who wrote kind of the hallmark book on lobbying. And the argument that we sort of make is, look, it's a personalistic regime in Washington right now. You actually literally have to engage in transactional politics with the president, who, I had a CEO tell me he was asked, he got a phone call. You are in Florida. Would you like to meet with the president of Mar-a-Lago? It will be $1 million donation to meet with him, 750 to meet with JD Vance, and 500,000 to meet with Elon Musk. Would you like a meeting? Very transactional. Now, you don't want to trade one risk for another. When you're in a world like that, you need lawyers who can help you understand what you can do and what you can't do, right? And also, frankly, if you want to stop the politics of the executive branch because they're going to harm you, Congress is utterly worthless right now. You got to go to the courts. So this idea that we have this synthetic risk from politics and legal, I think, drives home the ramification, the relevance of lawyers in that world.
Yeah, I thought that transactional nature was in full display this weekend. Instead of going to the Washington Correspondents' Dinner thing that traditionally all the pals went to, instead they all paid to go to some alternative event put on by the Trump administration, where they got to glad hand with senior officials in the executive branch. So that was a funny transition. When we talk about geopolitical risk, is this a concern only of large international businesses, or does this affect businesses of all sizes?
It's a great question. Look, the reason that we launched Hence Global, which we'll talk about, is because the latent market of users of geopolitical advice is effectively unlimited, right? Businesses are global today, whether they realize it or not. You may think your barber shop where you get a haircut is like the last vestige of a domestic business, but actually probably every product in that shop's been imported from overseas. As an example, like every business is global today to some extent. Everybody faces risk. Every tech entrepreneur that you have on your podcast has some exposure to global clients or global production. And all of them, this is my thesis, all of them would pay $1 to understand how the world is impacting their business so that they can get an advantage. What they're unwilling to do is spend $1 million on that advice.
Hmm.
And generally that's been the opportunity. The opportunity for companies is if you want really good advice, you hire someone like who I used to be, or you pay your lawyers a lot of money to help you navigate the situation. And look, the biggest companies have the most resources, and the richest people always pay to talk to the smartest humans. But technology can actually serve a lot of the market by helping people understand most of what they need to know. And technology does that at close to zero marginal cost per user. It's a
Yeah.
big opportunity.
But I would think among smaller businesses that don't have a big in house legal department and don't have people who could advise them on geopolitical risk around the country, even if they have access to something like what Hens has built, there must be a sense of sort of powerlessness there that they feel like, even if I understand what's going on globally, even understand the unruliness
Yeah.
of what's going on, the risk of what's going on, what do I, as the small tech company or small business, do about it?
Well, so, the subtitle of the book is Fighting Back When Politics, AI, and Law Upend the Rules of Business, because I think no matter how big or small your business is, CEOs are not helpless. We have lots of options in what we can do to get our message out there and create our own destiny. And so the book provides, chapter by chapter, every risk I raise, there's a section in the book about how you can fight back as a business. So let me give you an example of a small business that turned the tariffs into an opportunity. So I'm obsessed with decaffeinated coffee. It's like I don't drink caffeine. Um, and I got involved with a decaf cold brew company. And that company was the only one with really good cold brew decaf. And I helped them roll out at Whole Foods Market nationally. Then all of a sudden the tariffs come. And the CEO sends an email saying, coffee's being threatened with tariffs, as are all of our containers. We have this national rollout and we face existential risk. And wow, that's kind of scary. So within a day, that CEO took the realization straight to CNN and straight to ABC and went on television and stood up and talked about the risks that they were facing to their business. Now, step back and think about that for a second. If that CEO weeks prior had wanted to go on CNN to talk about their cold brew coffee business, they would not get on television. But when the world goes crazy, you can create opportunities out of that craziness to distinguish yourself by having a perspective, having a voice, having something that the 24-hour news cycle can digest. And as a result, this CEO got on television talking about their national rollout of their product. Now, that's a one-off example, but it's an important one. If you don't know what's going on in the world, you have no chance of creating your own opportunities from it. And if you are competing, let's say you're in a highly fragmented market, like, lots of e-commerce vendors are selling the same thing as you. If you're the one who understands the direction of travel on something like tariffs or on something like tax breaks for your sector, where your competitors feel themselves as too small to merit that type of analysis, you will outmaneuver them. So I think part of it is about reconceptualizing this from risk to opportunity. And I think if you'll allow me to tie it into the legal sector for a second,
I'd
lawyers are really
appreciate that.
bad. Yeah, lawyers are really bad at buying advice, right? They
Yeah.
sell advice. So the last thing they want to do is buy advice. When I used to sell geopolitical advice, they'd invite us, they'd have us as speakers, but they would never sign up. They never spend like $500,000 to have us advise them on politics because they're advisors. But their clients are getting whipsawed by politics in every region that they're in. And no matter how good a lawyer you are, you probably don't have memorized every facility and geography, every location that your client's operating in, every product SKU that they have. You don't have it on recall. Certainly not if you're managing 5 or 10 really, really important clients to you. The great thing about technology is that it has that immediate recall and that full scope. So you as a lawyer can use tools to actually keep track of how politics is impacting your clients and see that as a way to be the first phone call to them, the way to be the trusted advisor to them. So my big message is you may not think you're big enough You're big enough to change the political direction of travel, but that doesn't mean you can't change the way politics impacts your business.
I don't know how long you've been working on this book, but as you said, you started your company several years ago. You've been developing the product you rolled out recently, which we're going to talk about. We'll get to it in a second. But I'm curious how you perceive kind of the moment that we're in right now. I mean, for so many of us, it feels particularly volatile, particularly unruly, and it seems to be not just in the United States, but all across the globe. So, how do you look at the situation we're in right now?
Yeah, look, this is the most volatile moment since I started. Well, I really entered the political risk forecasting world in 2008 during the global financial crisis. So it's probably overstating it to say that like this is worse than the global financial crisis. So let me caution that there are acute moments of crisis and panic like COVID or the global financial crisis where you really just don't know which direction the world is going to go. But
Right.
back then you could rely on a handful of powerful countries to come together and on some level try and right the ship, certainly during the financial crisis. I think what we're experiencing now is the most self-inflicted volatility I've ever seen politically. And the fact that we're seeing wars in multiple regions, we're seeing geopolitical realignment, we're seeing domestic volatility, not just in the US, but across a number of different Western countries at the same time, makes it really, really hard to do business, to understand what the laws of your jurisdiction are in, and to understand how to navigate the conflicts between the laws in those jurisdictions because they're all changing. You may align with some Trump mandate around DEI and ESG only to find out that you're going to have to give up your European business to do that, only to find out that Trump doesn't get reelected in 4 years and you wish you hadn't done that. Right. So it's like I think it's
Right.
very challenging. So we've got this particularly volatile climate. The real issue to me, though, is if you want to take the US as an example, is this unbridled executive power, set aside who it is that's using it. When Congress no longer matters, it's very hard to run a business because Congress is a leaky ship. You're never surprised by what Congress does. Maybe you bet they're not going to get the votes on something, but you know what they're thinking about. You know what the policy proposals are. You know how to advise your clients about where it's going to go. It's never a bolt from the blue. Where with the current president and the sort of unlimited box that the Supreme Court has been willing to allow him to play in up till now, you really could wake up to a scenario where US citizens are actively being deported for having been critical of administration policies. Like, that's not, I didn't invent that scenario. That's like one standard deviation away from where we are, maybe less, right? You could wake up to a scenario where law firms are receiving executive orders from the president and he's forcing them to sign over millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. Oh, wait, that already happened, right? That happened, right? So we're living in a world where like anything you can imagine can happen because it's one person's idea effectuated through executive order and then negotiated in the courts to restrain it. That's really a challenging environment for businesses because even if net you wind up in a better place, like let's just say, and this feels a bit like the trajectory we're on. Let's say Trump rolls back almost all these tariffs. He's already been on path to do it. And let's just say he delivered a flat tax and a 5% corporate tax rate, right? Let's just say he did that. And let's say he deregulates. In the process of all of that volatility, a lot of businesses and a lot of value will have been destroyed, even if the end result on paper looks more profitable for businesses. And that's really the challenge when you don't have kind of rule of law guiding the way that politicians are behaving as a fallback, and when you don't have the legislature acting as a check, but really just standing by, doing nothing, it's hyper unpredictable. And that's just the US. I mean, feel free to ask me about other countries, but that's just the US.
I'm speaking today with Sean West, co-founder of Hence Technologies and author of Unruly, Fighting Back When Politics, AI, and Law Upend the Rules of Business. We've been discussing how the collision of politics, law, and technology is creating unprecedented challenges for businesses worldwide, and how legal professionals are uniquely positioned to help navigate this volatile landscape. When we come back, we'll explore the third dimension of Sean's three-legged stool, how artificial intelligence is both contributing to global uncertainty and potentially offering solutions. But first, take this opportunity to learn about the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Is your law firm drowning in administrative work? Practice Panther is the game changing practice management software that gives you back your most valuable asset, time. With automated workflows, secure document sharing, and seamless time tracking, you'll reduce errors and increase efficiency across your entire practice. Imagine handling client intake, case management, and billing all from one intuitive platform. Join the tens of thousands of attorneys who've already revolutionized their practice with Practice Panther. Start your free trial today at practicepanther.com. Voice recognition is great for quick texts or emails, but when accuracy matters, AI guesses. As you well know, in law, guessing isn't an option. With SpeakRight, real human transcriptionists deliver accurate, professionally formatted legal documents in about 3 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The free mobile app provides instant access to trained legal secretaries, plus Clio integration for seamless filing. It's like carrying a full support staff on your phone. LawNext listeners claim your $100 free credit right now at speakright.com/LawNext. Welcome back to LawNext. Before the break, Sean West and I were discussing the geopolitical uncertainty that businesses face today and the erosion of rules-based systems that previously provided stability. Now let's turn to how technology, particularly artificial intelligence, fits into this complex picture. We'll also talk about Hence Global, the newly launched platform that uses AI to help businesses and legal professionals monitor and manage geopolitical uncertainty. Let's get back to that conversation. Well, what I wanted to ask you about is not another country, but another dimension to this kind of three-legged stool. I mean, you've got geopolitical uncertainty, you've got the collapse of the rule of law in many ways, but the subtitle of your book talks about AI as a factor in all of this. And so, how is technology, how is artificial intelligence specifically uh, contributing to this situation that we're in now?
Yeah, look, AI can be an accelerant on good things and it can be an accelerant on bad things. And it wasn't long ago that most people had never played with AI. Now you've got now you've got many people using it as their default pathway into gateway into the internet, right? Just whatever it is. And your listeners will be familiar with risks from deep fakes and hallucinations and things like that. The risks get a lot scarier than that. And that's what I spent a lot of time talking about in the book, right? When the government's collected lots of data on its citizens, the ability to use AI to surveil and sort people into good and bad lists is very, very easy. We see that not just, China's basically done that for the last decade or 2 decades with its social credit system. We're starting to see a little bit of that in the US, right? So that's a bit of a risk. So surveillance is a risk. The automation of traditional processes like lawsuits become a real risk. I wrote a piece in October in Harvard Business Review about how legal is going to be the new cyber risk because when it costs nothing to file lawsuits against people, you're going to start to see millions of lawsuits pointed at your enemies, or pointed at you if you're someone's enemy.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of a scary thought when you think about it. But kind of the real issue, the kind of core threat from AI is not, can you apply it to drones and have drones be more lethal? Because people are pretty good at being lethal if they want to be lethal, right? The real risk is that we erode the concept of truth itself. And so a couple of lawyers coined the term the liar's dividend, which I refer to pretty frequently, which is that we all are on the hunt for fake information and we call it fake. When we see it, we say it's fake. But the problem is that when you're exposed to so much fake stuff, you start to believe true things are fake. So we saw Elon Musk in court a couple of years ago. They played a video of him saying the Tesla auto drive was completely safe. And his lawyer's defense was you can't prove that video is not a deep fake. Well, for lawyers who value video evidence in the hierarchy of evidence, the idea that anyone could just assert that the burden is on you to prove a video is not a deep fake is a pretty chilling thought. Now think about it outside of the court of law, just on our normal perceptions. We're surrounded by information that may be real or may be fake on a daily basis. And it erodes our ability to accept things at face value, which erodes our ability to develop relationships and erodes the social contract of societies that we live in as a whole, which is a scary, scary scenario.
I haven't had a chance to read the book, but I did get the book and I started reading. And in the foreword, you talk about that concept that you just touched on in terms of, you talked about it, people weaponizing the law like cyber attacks, which I thought was an interesting concept. I was at a conference at Harvard last year where somebody else kind of talking about a similar concept where they talked about the distributed denial of justice
Mhm.
attack. Basically, the fact that you can use AI, you can use all these tools now to just flood the courts with litigation and disable the courts effectively, and not that they aren't already disabled, but further disable the courts. You talk about robot lobbyists, citizens practicing machine-aided law. I mean, it's kind of a scary concept. There's on one hand, there's sort of an access to justice aspect to it that says, oh, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe more people can get access to the courts. But when it does become weaponized, it's a really kind of a scary concept.
So I think there's a huge access to justice benefit from that. So let's be positive for a minute. We've been negative for a while. I'll get to the negativity in a second. But like I give the example in the book. I go in depth in the example in the book. My car was rear-ended when I was stopped dead. I got a concussion. I was diagnosed with a concussion. 2 days later, verified that I had a concussion. I sent the information to the insurance company. I don't want to sue an insurance company. I want to do business with them. Like just pay my
Hmm.
medical bill. They sent me a letter back. We've determined you had no concussion. And I thought, my gosh, you're gonna like, do I really have to file a lawsuit against you? And then I was talking to Natalie Knowlton, who I know you know, and she
Sure.
said, actually, there are some AI powered personal injury lawyers who can help, who you can draft some information to send back to the insurance company using. And I did that. I found Zaf Legal, regulated out of Utah, which has an AI powered bot. And I took the demand letter and I sent it to the insurance company. And within minutes, they like 10x the initial offer that they had made to me. Now, that's pre-litigation. Like that's not we're not there's no unauthorized practice of law. There's
Yep.
they literally just created a demand letter for me in the right language, right? I
Hmm.
did file it through ChatGPT and said develop a complaint for me so I could show that I have a complaint if I wanted it, and it did it. But the reality is like I'm an early adopter of these things and I experiment with it on a lot of levels, but that's a pretty cool outcome for an average citizen to have in a world where they're disempowered often. So I think that's really good. And then, I've written about in China, they have legal robots in the courtrooms that you can punch in your case if you want to sue someone. It'll tell you you're 70% likely to win. Would you like to file the claim now? And you click a button and file it. Now, the system's kind of wired to get you to settle because they want like a harmonious society, but it's up to you whether you want to file the claim. It'll file it for you. So the tech hasn't been the barrier to doing this. I think it's
Hmm.
our conception of it. So I think that's pretty positive. But on the negative side, there's a huge amount of risk from flooding people with fraudulent claims or with frivolous claims. So I give an example in the HBR article. The Treasury Department under Biden proposed a law to regulate crypto brokering, and a bunch of crypto lawyer hacktivists did not like it. So they released an AI bot and said, type in your name and your company, and this will automatically generate a comment on the Treasury draft rule. They generated over 100,000 comments, and Treasury by law has to consider all of them. So what ended up
Hmm.
happening? It delayed the rule, and now we've got like the crypto president. So actually, if you think about it, like that's a pretty profound outcome for a small number of crypto hacktivist lawyers to have engineered using AI. They ground a rule the federal government wanted to a halt until a new political environment came about. And so, we can talk about other examples of it, but they kind of those powers can be used for good and those powers can be used for evil, for sure.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, we've talked about the problem. It's an enormous problem, and we've talked about the fact that you've now developed a solution to help businesses and legal professionals at least keep themselves informed around the problem. So why don't we talk about that a little bit before we run out of time here? So just recently, you guys have launched this AI powered tool, Hence Global. Tell us about it. Tell what it does.
Yeah, look, I'm thrilled about Hence Global. We've been working on it for a long time. We've got a handful of great early adopter law firms that have been working with us on it, as well as other use cases. And really, the kind of core concept is there's too much news in the world to really keep track of on a personal basis. You can set up RSS feeds, you can set up Google News alerts. It's very, very hard
Nobody knows what
to
an RSS feed is anymore.
anymore. Yeah, they don't need it anymore. Maybe I'm dating myself here. But the reality is there's too much news going on. So you really need a system to sort through what matters to you. But in order to do that, the system needs to do a few things. Number one, it needs to be smart enough to understand politics and understand what matters. Number two, it needs to be smart enough to understand business, to understand the ramifications. And three, it needs to be smart enough to understand you personally, not your organization. I think a lot of products stop at like, you are a lawyer at X law firm. No, you are the employment lawyer and your colleague is the intellectual property lawyer. And the things you need are radically different to see. And your client portfolios are completely different. So what the same comment about tariffs mean radically different things to both of you. From your
Mhm.
vantage point. So, what we've done is built a system that ingests the world's news, classifies it, understands you based on public source information about your organization and what you tell it about yourself and what you're interested in, and then delivers you a personal daily briefing of the things you need to know that matter to you, along with the ability to go way deeper within the tool. I think a lot of lawyers are using it for the daily briefing because they read it and it says, this issue happened, and clients that you have, like these four companies, are affected by it. Like, whoa, now I can call those clients today or I can forward it to them. That's pretty interesting. But of course, you can jump in the system and research it further. And we're going to take the product in a lot of different directions to go deeper on, can I produce a market entry study from a political point of view? Can I produce a travel guide, a security briefing for travel? There's a lot. Can I develop scenarios? There's a lot of stuff you can do if you figured out how to understand what's going on in the world and how it matters to someone. So that's the path that we're on.
Yeah. Is this, I mean, is this more than a simple news aggregator? How does it different from an aggregator?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, aggregating the news is table stakes, but if you don't do it, you can't actually give good advice. So I think
Hmm.
it's really, really important to know what's happened today, what's happened yesterday, what's happened recently, if you want to understand what's going to happen tomorrow. So there's a big emphasis on winning kind of current events in the first version of the product. Like, can we help you do that? Yes. Now, in
Hmm.
order to really make sense of that, you kind of need the historical corpus to understand what's going on. So, if you want to understand the Canadian elections happening, you don't just want to read the news headlines. You want to understand a bit about the history of Canada. System has to look backwards to do that, but you don't necessarily want to read a 20-page paper. You want it to tell you the two set. You want to know that it's been informed by that when it's summarized it, the same way that your junior associate should have done all the research to write the one paragraph for you on the Canadian election. So what we're trying to deal with is people have information overload. They also don't have full visibility. They don't speak every language. They don't read the news of every country, but they need to know what's going on globally. So we want to inform in that way. But beyond that, it serves as an analytical tool. It also serves as a marketing tool. So law firms are using it to draft client alerts because if the system can develop a point of view about how a news story matters for a client, that saves the law firm the need to develop that client alert. If the system can generate a newsletter branded by the law firm or even the solo practitioner, that's pretty useful. Like I, just as an experiment, launched a daily AI generated newsletter by Hence. We went from 0 to 1,000 followers in less than a week, right? So people are reading my AI output as a newsletter.
Hmm.
There's no reason why they wouldn't read yours, Bob, or someone else's AI output. And the AI is actually it's internalized what matters to me. So it's actually seems like it's in my voice and my perspective, which is
Hmm.
interesting and scary, but also valuable. So I think there are a lot of ways you can use it beyond just aggregation of news.
Yeah. How granular does it get in terms of the extent to which it gets sort of customized to a business, customized to a user within that business? If I'm an in-house lawyer at a corporation that operates globally, and my focus is on, say, intellectual property, and over across the room is a lawyer who's working for the same business but focused on maybe real estate deals all around the globe or something like that. Are we just going to see the same feed coming up, or
No.
is it really going to be kind of more nuance in that?
The outputs are different. I mean, the things you care about are different, and it knows the things you care about are different, right? I mean, tariffs is a pretty good example to think about because, there are direct employment effects on tariffs that you can understand. And there are, contract like supplier contract effects that you can understand. And the lawyers responsible for those things need different outputs, right? Just as an example. And so just saying tariffs have moved forward or receded is not helpful. You need a system that helps you understand it in your context. Now, a lawyer might raise their hand and say, well, I'm the expert on employment law. Please don't have your AI tell me what this means for employment law. But the reality is, the system's not trying to replace your advice. The system's trying to tell you on story number 7 today, on the weak signal that you would miss, there's an employment law ramification that you didn't understand. And that you would be able to understand it and advise your clients, but you just like you didn't pick up on what was going on in South Korea today. And the system's telling you there's employment implications from something that's gone on in South Korea. And that's like very valuable for lawyers. So no, I think the special sauce of the product is that it should feel like having a personal AI advisor, briefing you, an AI business advisor, because that's what you get when you buy traditional advice. You get someone who knows you and who tailors their advice to you, but they're just doing it with a fraction of the visibility. They can't see everything.
Yeah, you had a story in the at least in the forward to your book about Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan Chase, talking about the fact that basically financial institutions are engaged in a knife fight with regulators right now, and they need to be in a war footing. I forget whether these are your words or his words, but anticipating threats coming from every angle and proactively defeating them. So, how does having access to all of this information position, let's focus on legal professionals, whether at a law firm or an organization, how does it really empower them to be on that war footing, to be ready to act proactively?
Yeah, look, I think it's very dangerous to act without being informed. So if you were to shift to a war footing with poor situational awareness, that's probably the worst outcome. You will destroy value. So what a lot of lawyers end up doing is kind of retreating into their traditional client work and not thinking as strategically as necessary about what's going on in the world to advise their clients. I think that's going to change a lot as all the other founders who come on your podcast are automating the practice of law. The necessity for lawyers to be strategic advisors is going to increase because that's going to be their differentiation against most of the AI tools that are doing parts of the legal supply chain, value chain. And what we want to own is the space for lawyers to understand the way that the world is impacting them and their clients through political change, legal change, technological change. And I think if you can do that, if you can equip lawyers to have that awareness, they know how to fight. They know how to file lawsuits on behalf of their clients. They know how to take issues to regulators and fight back. I think Jamie Dimon's quote was great. It was like, if you're in a knife fight, you need to bring a knife, and that's where we're at, which is just like this great quote where, like, don't retreat. Now, as I say in the book, it's pretty easy to take that position when you're the top banker in America and you're kind of bulletproof. But for the rest of us, we need to think about which battles we actually want to pick. It's not about picking every battle. It's about understanding what really matters to your business. You can only do that if you have a finger on the pulse of the political situation, or else you're going to fight the wrong battle. So we want to inform everyone, and we particularly want to inform the market of people who've been priced out of advice. And I think we've got a product that's well on its way to doing that. I'm grateful for you covering it.
Yeah. What's the state of affairs right now? I mean, how prepared do you think most businesses actually are uh, to meet or manage the kind of geopolitical risks that you talk about in your book and that you've been talking about here today?
I think big companies are in a pretty good position because the world's been unruly for quite some time. And one of the benefits I had of
It's
writing the
more
book,
unruly. It's so
yeah,
unruly, right?
one of the benefits I have of the fact that I put my pencil down on November 15th was I only had 10 days to consider Donald Trump. And so I had to write a book that actually wrote the arc of how we got here. And that's like really, really important because if you wrote the book today, you'd have recency bias. So I think we have to give companies credit that they've been living in this environment and they've built up intelligence teams and legal teams that are focused on these issues. They can always do better. They can always have, better monitoring or selection, et cetera. But I think it's the medium and large sub-enterprise scale businesses, the businesses that are like $100 million in revenue or $1 billion in revenue, not $30 billion in revenue, 50 or trillion or whatever. It's these companies that are the ones who are most exposed without understanding it. They're the ones who have never invested in having a strategic in-house legal department. As an example, they'll have 5 lawyers for a $500 million revenue business, and those lawyers mainly do customer deals or something like that, and employment, whatever it is. I think a lot of them are waking up to the fact that they need strategic general counsel, but there's not enough strategic general counsel who've cut their teeth in the political world floating around. So those folks are all upskilling. My hope is my book is a part of that process. It's not the only way, but I think a lot of general counsels are actually trying to sort of go back to school, whether through books or audio or master classes or executive education, to understand how to navigate political volatility. I think it's a big opportunity for folks who are mid-career that are trying to make that jump to distinguish themselves by understanding the environment better than their predecessors, because frankly, a lot of the folks who are sitting in the seat grew up in a world that was converging. And if you can argue that that you're unruly native, so to speak, then you probably have a better chance at getting that seat for the future.
So I think you've just answered what was going to be my next question, because I was going to ask, apart from read your book, use your product, for lawyers who are worried about the state of disruption that they see in their practices and the businesses they represent. What advice do you have for them? And it sounds like what you're saying is, as you said, become unruly aware, to go out and learn about what's going on, educate themselves. Would that be your advice?
Yeah, well, look, I think as GI Joe used to say, knowing the problem is half the battle, right? If you can look outside and say something is wrong, and we're not afraid to have that conversation internally, which a lot of organizations are right now, right? Then you can start to figure out what knowledge resources do we have, and you can rethink your knowledge supply chain. So to me, that's the biggest issue. Like, we all think about our goods supply chain, like, where did that nice chair in your office come from? Where did your microphone come from? But where are you actually getting your knowledge from? Who are your advisors? Do you have the right advisors under NDA so that when there's a crisis, they will be there to help you? Do you have an exclusive relationship with them so that they can advise your competitor because you're willing to pay for that today? Do you actually understand how your team is getting its news and its insights? Like, that is the critical question of the day. Because if bias is creeping into the analysis that you're then relying on, you will get it wrong. You'll just get it wrong. Even if that bias aligns with your own politics, it may feel good, but you'll get it wrong. So I think the knowledge supply chain concept to me is one that I think the legal community needs to think about. And honestly, Bob, the biggest advice for lawyers is get out of your domain to get that advice. Like, I was surprised when I started doing geopolitics for lawyers, like, I was pretty much the only one. And so that was like both an opportunity, but also a scary realization that the insular nature of the legal community means that lawyers are not getting exposed to the best and brightest in their domains, because they're actually looking for the lawyer who can interpret the external domain. So we have superstars who are geopolitical experts in the space, or legal tech experts, or or particular domain experts on the law. But there are people who are actual experts in their fields, and the legal community needs to invest more in bringing them to their big conferences as the opening or closing keynotes, to actually enrolling in the executive education programs those people offer, so that you can get their insights. I think that we live in a world that is no longer siloed. And if the legal community thinks of themselves as being in a silo, they will get smacked in ways that are really painful. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Well, Sean, I really appreciate your coming on the show and chatting with me today. It's been great to do that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Look, it's long been on my list, something I've really wanted to do because I love what you do, and it's been a pleasure to speak here. Thank you.
Well, thanks. You're very kind. So all of this will be in the show notes, but Hence Global, hence.ai. Find it online. The book, you want to hold it up again? You got it right there. Unruly, Fighting Back When Politics, AI, and Law Upend the Rules of Business. As I say, I just got it over the weekend, so I have not had a chance to get too far into it, but I'm looking forward to read it. It really seems to be well written on top of everything else, and pretty engrossing. So I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thanks so much,
and other than that, be well, and thanks for doing it. See ya.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for listening to today's show. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments, you can do so on LinkedIn, or message me on any other social media, or by emailing me at ambrogi@gmail.com. If you like the show, please leave us a review. LawNext is a production of LawNext Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Law Next.